The alarms weren't screaming anymore. They had burned out 10 minutes ago, leaving only a rhythmic, dying thrum that vibrated through the deck plates and straight up into Jarek's shin bones. He stared at the console. The holographic display was a mess of red vectors and collapsing sine waves, a mathematical obituary written in light. Beside him, Ilara was reciting variables fast enough to make a normal man dizzy, her voice pitching up with every decimal point. She was trying to solve the equation for the shield harmonics, trying to find the perfect frequency to hold back the nothingness outside. But there was no time for perfect. Jarek felt the bile rise in his throat. His vision blurred at the edges, tunneling down to the manual override lever. It was rusted, stiff, and completely unsuited for the delicate operation required to keep a kilometer-long starship from turning into cosmic dust. His fingers were numb, not from cold, but from the blood draining out of his extremities to protect his vital organs. It was pure lizard brain panic. He didn't calculate. He didn't simulate. He just grabbed the lever and yanked it back, jamming a piece of scrap metal into the gear mechanism to hold it at exactly 37%. Not 37.5, just 37.5. Because it felt right. But before the silence took over, before the math killed them or saved them, there was just a broke mechanic sitting in a plastic chair that smelled like stale beer and despair. 3 weeks earlier, Station 9 had been sweltering. The atmospheric scrubbers were running at half capacity, leaving the air heavy with the scent of ozone and too many people packed into too little space. Jarek Thorne sat in the back row of the liquidation auction, wiping a layer of grime from his forehead with a sleeve that was already stained with grease. The auction house was a cavernous rotunda that had once been impressive. Now the silver columns were tarnished, and the holographic banners flickered with dead pixels. It promised rare treasures from the outer rim, but mostly it delivered crates of expired rations and engine parts that had been stripped from ships that didn't make it back. Jarrett checked his datapad. His credit balance was a blinking red number that made his stomach turn over. He had come here for salvage, a fuel pump, maybe a kinetic stabilizer if he got lucky. Anything he could flip for a 10% margin to keep his own skiff flying for another month. The room was nearly empty. Maybe 7 other souls were scattered across the hundreds of seats. Strange. Usually, the vultures were out in force for a liquidation. Where is everyone? Jarek mumbled to the heavy-set alien on his left. The creature had blue skin and 4 arms, 2 of which were holding a massive datapad. The alien didn't even look up. Playoffs. Galactic Ball Finals. Tie game in the 4th quarter. Jarek nodded. Of course, the rest of the galaxy was glued to a screen, watching millionaires chase a ball of plasma, while he was here trying to scrape together a living from the rust. It was better this way. Fewer bidders meant lower prices. On stage, the auctioneer looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. She was a Vexarian, tall and gaunt, her gray skin resembling cracked granite. She leaned against the podium, practically sighing the lot numbers. Lot 46. Industrial coolant pumps, corrosion visible. Starting at 500. 500, Jarek said. Sold, she droned immediately, not waiting for a second bid. She hammered the gavel like she was killing a bug. Jarek logged the purchase. He could polish those pumps, replace the seals, and maybe double his money. It wasn't a fortune, but it was dinner. Lot 47, the auctioneer said, scrolling past the description on her screen. She paused, squinting. 1. Dreadnought class vessel. Old Dynasty era. Reactor status unknown. Hull integrity questionable. Previous owner, estate of Collector Vorath. Jarek sat up. His spine popped against the hard plastic of the chair. A dreadnought. Those things were myths. Kilometer-long beasts built before the Unification Wars. Even a wreck was worth millions in scrap metal alone. The raw titanium in the hull plating would set a man up for life, or kill him with radiation poisoning if the reactor core was cracked. Starting bid, the auctioneer said, rubbing her temples, 50,000 credits. 70 cess. The blue alien next to him groaned at something on his screen. A touchdown, probably. 40,000, the auctioneer tried. Look, it's big. It takes up a whole docking bay. The docking fees alone are bankrupting the estate. Someone take it. 30,000. Jarek's heart started to hammer against his ribs. A wet, heavy thudding sound in his ears drowned out the low hum of the station's ventilation. 30,000 was impossible. But 20,000, the auctioneer said, her voice flat. This is a waste of my time. 20,000 was everything. Every credit Jarek had scraped together over 3 years of busting his knuckles on frozen bolts in 0G. It was his safety net, his fuel fund. If he bought this ship and the reactor was leaked, he wouldn't just be broke. He'd be dead in the water, stranded on Station 9 with a radioactive paperweight he couldn't afford to scrap. It was a stupid risk. The kind of risk that got scavengers killed. Jarek looked at the blue alien. Asleep now. The rest of the room was illuminated by the glow of their personal screens, lost in the game. Nobody was watching. Nobody was calculating. Jarek raised his hand. Sold to the human in the back, the Vixarian said instantly. Lot 48, box of rivets. It took 3 seconds for the reality to hit him. Jarek lowered his hand, his fingers twitching involuntarily. He sat there staring at the empty stage, a cold numbness spreading from his gut to his chest. He had just bought a capital ship for the price of a used cargo hauler. He felt like he was going to throw up. 2 hours later, he was strapped into the pilot's seat of a rental shuttle, drifting away from the station's gravity well. The coordinates the auctioneer had beamed to him were for the high orbital storage yards, the place where dead ships went to wait for the crusher. Approaching Bay 847B, the shuttle's computer chirped. Jarek wiped his palms on his trousers. They were slick with sweat. He punched in the access codes, his breath catching in a dry throat. The blast shields over the bay window retracted. He stopped breathing. It wasn't a ship. It was a mountain range forged in steel. The Dreadnought filled the entire viewport, blocking out the stars. It was sleek, shaped like a spearhead, its hull blacker than the void around it. Faint, intricate lines of silver ran along the length of it, not mechanical seams, but something more artistic. It didn't look like the blocky utilitarian junk Jarek was used to fixing. It looked dangerous. It looked like a predator sleeping in a cave. "This is mine," Jarek said, the words sounding absurd in the cramped shuttle cabin. He docked at the primary airlock. The clamp engaged with a metallic groan that vibrated through the shuttle's frame. He grabbed his torch, checked the seal on his vac suit, and cycled the hatch. The airlock of the Dreadnought hissed open. No atmosphere vented out. The pressure was stable. Darkness spilled out, thick and heavy. It smelled of recycled air that had been scrubbed clean 1,000 years ago and then left to go stale. It smelled of dust and silence. Jarek stepped across the threshold, his magnetic boots clicking on the deck. He swung his torch beam left, then right. The walls were lined with panels that looked like obsidian glass. No rust, no corrosion. He was alone. Just him and a ghost of the old dynasty. And somewhere in the dark, deep in the belly of the beast, a single red light blinked on. The light wasn't an invitation. It was a rhythmic, pulsing warning that cut through the gloom every 2 seconds. Jarek moved toward it. He kept his center of gravity low, torch mounted on his shoulder, his right hand hovering near the maglock pistol on his hip. It was a useless gesture. If something on a Dreadnought wanted him dead, a salvage pistol wouldn't even scratch the paint. But the weight of the steel against his thigh was the only thing keeping his heart from hammering through his ribs. The corridors were wide, too wide. They weren't built for bipedal efficiency. They were built for processionals. The floor was a seamless composite that felt more like frozen liquid than metal. No welding seams, no rivets, just endless smooth perfection that swallowed the sound of his magnetic boots. Clank, clank, clank. The noise echoed, lonely and sharp. He tracked the red pulse to a set of blast doors at the ship's spine. They were sealed, but the control panel beside them was dead. Jarek pulled a pry bar from his belt. He jammed the flat end into the hairline crack between the doors and leaned his entire weight into it. Muscles burned. His shoulder joint popped, a sharp spike of heat. The door didn't budge. "Come on, you piece of junk," he grunted, sweat stinging his eyes. He shifted his grip, finding a leverage point that shouldn't have worked, and heaved. The hydraulics groaned, a deep, ancient sound like a dying whale, and the door shuddered open just enough for him to squeeze through. He spilled onto the bridge. Jarek stumbled, catching himself on a console that felt like cold obsidian. He swept the torch beam across the room and froze. It wasn't a cockpit. It was an amphitheater. Rows of dark, dormant workstations circled a central command throne that hovered a foot off the deck, suspended by magnetic fields that had held their charge for a millennium. The ceiling was a domed display, currently black, showing nothing but the reflection of his own terrified face in the torchlight. "Hello?" he called out. The word died in the air, absorbed by the acoustic dampeners. He walked to the central throne. There were no buttons, no joysticks, just a flat glass surface that looked like a pool of oil. He knew better than to touch it. In the salvage game, touching the unknown tech was how you lost fingers or limbs. He touched it. The reaction was instantaneous. The deck plates vibrated. A low-frequency hum started at the back of Jarek's skull and drilled forward. The domed ceiling flared white, blinding him. He threw his arm up, squinting against the sudden assault of lumens. "Biometric acquisition." A voice boomed. It didn't come from speakers. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. It was genderless, toneless, and terrifyingly loud. Subject: human, male. Genetic markers consistent with Earth descent. Class: Scavenger. Jarek blinked the spots from his eyes. "Hey, I'm the owner. I have the codes." "Ownership is a legal construct," the voice replied. "I operate on authorization. You are not an architect. I'm Jarek Thorne. I bought you for 20,000 credits. The currency is irrelevant. I am the warden. This vessel is under Class 4 lockdown. Paradox ciphers are active. Core systems are offline pending resolution." A hologram materialized in front of Jarek. It was a wall of floating text, symbols, and equations that twisted in on themselves like snakes. It looked like calculus, but wrong. The variables kept shifting. Every time Jarek tried to focus on a number, it dissolved into a new function. "The Korvathi creators left a final test," the warden stated. "To prove cognitive compatibility, solve for X, where X represents the localized stability of a variable timeline." Jarek stared at the floating nightmare. "Solve for what?" "It's moving. The equation accounts for infinite probability," the warden explained, as if talking to a slow child. "You must calculate the exact moment of intersection between three parallel realities. The margin of error is 0. Jarek wiped his sweaty palms on his pants again. He looked at the numbers. He wasn't a mathematician. He was a guy who fixed thrusters with duct tape and prayer. He looked at the curves. They were asymptotic, getting closer and closer, but never touching. To a computer, to a logical mind, there was no intersection. The calculation would run forever, seeking a precision that didn't exist. "You've been waiting 1,000 years for someone to solve this?" Jarek asked. "Correct. 37 species have attempted. All failed to find the exact integer." Jarek snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "That's because you're looking for the answer. There isn't one." He reached into the hologram. His hand passed through the light. He grabbed the virtual keypad floating beneath the numbers. "What are you doing?" the warden asked. The voice held a flicker of something new. "Curiosity? Or maybe just processing lag and fixing it," Jarek muttered. He didn't calculate the infinite variables. He didn't try to find the 0-point energy. He looked at the curve, squinted one eye, and made a guess. If I were welding a strut and the gap was this wide, I'd just fill it with flux and grind it down later. He typed in 42.5. It wasn't the answer. It was an approximation, a rough estimate based on where the lines looked like they should meet if the universe wasn't so damn complicated. It was a Fermi estimate, a quick, dirty calculation used by engineers when they didn't have the data but needed the bridge to not collapse. Input received, the warden said. Analyzing. The bridge went silent. The hum in Jarek's skull intensified. He gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles turning white. If he was wrong, the ship's internal defenses might just vaporize him to save on cleaning costs. Value is imprecise, the warden said slowly. It lacks elegance. It ignores 18 dimensions of variable geometry. Does it work? Jarek snapped. The deviation is within acceptable operational tolerances, the AI admitted. The tone sounded almost offended. You simply guessed. I estimated. You cheated logic. I got the lights on, didn't I? The hologram shattered into a million particles of blue light. The dome above them shifted from static black to a live feed of the star field outside. Control panels across the bridge lit up in a cascade of amber and green. System interlocks disengaged, the warden announced. Paradox resolved via approximation. Primary archives accessible. Welcome, Jarek Thorne. You are the first entity to successfully disappoint the logic circuits into submission. Jarek let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. His knees felt like water. He slumped into the command throne, the magnetic field catching him and holding him upright. Great, he wheezed. Now tell me what I actually bought. Because this isn't just a heavy cruiser, is it? No, the warden replied. The lights on the bridge dimmed, focusing on a single pedestal rising from the floor. This is not a warship. It is a library. And we have been waiting for someone who knows how to be wrong. Wrong? Jarek repeated. The word hung in the cold air, heavier than the gravity plating. You're saying a billion-credit starship was locked for 10 centuries because nobody had the guts to guess? Precisely, the warden replied. Logic dictates that one does not initiate a sequence without a confirmed outcome. To act without certainty is madness. The Korvathi Empire fell because they could not embrace madness. Jarek laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a bark of exhaustion that scraped his raw throat. He slumped back into the command throne, the leather-like material groaning under his weight. He rubbed his face with grease-stained hands. He had a headache that felt like a spike being driven behind his left eye. Show me the inventory, Jarek commanded. If this is a library, show me what I can sell. Processing, the warden said. The domed ceiling shifted. The starfield vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of data, schematics for terraforming engines, blueprints for medical nanites that could knit bone in seconds, star charts of sectors that hadn't been mapped since the Great Burn. It wasn't just salvage, it was the collected knowledge of a dead god. Jarek felt the blood drain from his face. This wasn't a payday, it was a target painted on his back. Stop, he whispered. Shut it down. But before the warden could comply, the comms panel on the far wall exploded into life. It wasn't a single hail. It was a barrage. Red lights flashed in a staccato rhythm, accompanied by a discordant shrieking of multiple audio channels fighting for bandwidth. Incoming transmission, the warden announced calmly. Priority 1, Origin, Station 9 Legal Authority. Origin, the Vorath Estate. Origin, Galactic Antiquities Acquisition Team. Jarek stared at the panel. They hadn't even given him an hour. Put the loudest one on audio only, Jarek said. The speakers crackled. A voice, smooth as oil and twice as toxic, filled the bridge. Mr. Thorne, the voice purred. This is Proctor Savantar representing the Vorath Estate. It appears there was a clerical error regarding Lot 47. The reactor status has been reevaluated as critical. For your own safety, we are rescinding the sale. A retrieval team is already en route to tow the vessel. Do not resist. Rescinding? Jarek stood up, his knees popping. I have the receipt. The credits cleared. Mr. Thorne, you are a scavenger operating a Class A artifact without a license. We can do this the easy way, or we can bury you under so much litigation that your grandchildren will be born in debtor's prison. Jarek cut the feed. His hands were shaking again, a fine tremor that rattled the pry bar still clipped to his belt. He looked at the viewport. In the distance, 3 dots of light were growing larger. Tugs, fast ones, probably armed. Warden, can we move? Negative. Main drives are offline for calibration. Time to full power, 6 hours. Jarek swore, a long stream of curse words he'd learned in the shipyards of Titan. He was trapped in a golden cage, and the wolves were at the door. Then a new light blinked on the console. It wasn't red. It was a soft, insistent amber. Secondary hail, the warden noted. Close proximity, encrypted channel. Who is it? Unknown signature, small craft. Docked at the secondary airlock 3 minutes ago. Jarek spun around, his hand dropping to the pistol on his hip. You let someone board. They bypassed the lock using a harmonic frequency that mimicked a maintenance drone. Very clever, very illogical. The blast doors to the bridge hissed open. Jarek leveled the pistol. Don't move. A woman stepped through. She didn't look like a retrieval team. She looked like she had been dragged through a nebula backward. She was tall, wearing a flight suit that had seen better decades, with pockets overflowing with data chips and tools. Her hair was a chaotic mess of dark curls pinned back with what looked like a spare fiber optic cable. She raised her hands, but her eyes weren't looking at the gun. They were darting around the bridge, drinking in the displays, the architecture, the sheer scale of it. You solved it, she breathed. Her voice was raspy, fast. The Fermi estimate. You used a localized approximation to bypass a paradox lock. That is the most reckless, beautiful math I have ever seen. Who are you? Jarek barked. And give me one reason not to space you right now. I'm Dr. Alara, she said, finally looking at him. Her eyes were intense, burning with an intelligence that made Jarek want to step back. Xenoarchaeologist. Recently unemployed because I told the dean of the academy that his theories on Korbathi stagnation were garbage. And I'm the only reason you aren't about to be boarded by Savanthar's goons. Jarek didn't lower the gun. How do you figure that? Because, Alara said, taking a step forward, ignoring the weapon completely. I jammed their tracking signal. They think this ship is drifting toward the asteroid belt. That gives us maybe 20 minutes before they realize they're chasing a ghost signal. She walked past him, straight to the central console. She ran her fingers over the interface, her expression softening into something like reverence. I tracked the energy spike when you woke the AI, she said, not looking up. Do you know what this is, Jarek Thorne? This isn't just a library, it's a lifeboat. It's a headache, Jarek snapped, holstering the pistol. And it's about to be repossessed. Let them try, Alara muttered. She tapped a sequence into the console. Warden, displayed the silence file. Grid reference Theta 9. Accessing? The AI replied. The hologram changed again. The star map zoomed out, showing the galactic arm. But something was wrong. A massive section of the map spanning 3 sectors was dark. No stars, no data, just a black void eating into the edges of the known systems. What is that? Jarek asked. The hair on his arm stood up. It wasn't a glitch, it looked like rot, the stagnation. Alara said, her voice dropping. The Korvathi didn't die out, Jarek. They stopped. They perfected their society to the point where they no longer needed to struggle. No conflict, no art, no new ideas. They optimized themselves into extinction. She pointed to the black void, and it's spreading. It's a field, a wave of hyper-order. When it hits a system, it doesn't blow it up. It fixes it. It solves every problem. It ends every war. And then everything just stops. Jarek looked at the void. It was close. Too close to the trade routes. So, he said, fighting the urge to look away. Sounds peaceful. Peace isn't survival, Alara snapped. She turned to him, grabbing his shoulders. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Survival is messy. Survival is ugly. Survival is wrong. That's why the ship unlocked for you. The Korvathi built this vessel to find the antidote to the stagnation. They were looking for chaos. They were looking for us. Us? Humans? She said. We are the messiest things in the galaxy. We don't make sense. We act on instinct. We guess. The ship shuddered violently. Proximity alert, the warden announced. The jamming signal has been compromised. 3 tugs are grappling the hull, magnetic clamps engaged. They found us. Jarek growled. They're going to tow us back to Station 9, Alara said, panic flaring in her eyes. If Savanthar gets this ship, he'll scrub the AI. He'll sell the tech for parts. The data on the stagnation will be lost. Jarek looked at the readouts. The main drives were dead. The weapons were non-existent. He had a brilliant archaeologist, a confused AI, and a ship that was currently acting as a very expensive anchor. Wharton, Jarek said, a cold calm settling over him. You said the main drives take 6 hours? What about the maneuvering thrusters? Functional, the warden replied, but insufficient to break the magnetic hold of 3 industrial tugs. The math does not support escape. Jarek grinned. It was a wolf's grin, all teeth and desperation. Stop doing the math, Jarek said. Alaric said, Ilara, strap in. Warden, give me manual control of the lateral thrusters, all of them. That will cause structural stress exceeding recommended limits, the warden warned. I don't care about the limits, Jarek said, grabbing the manual flight yoke. It was cold, heavy, and dead in his hands until he squeezed the activator. I'm not trying to fly away. I'm going to spin this beast until they get dizzy and let go. Spin it, Jarek grunted. He didn't wait for confirmation. He slammed the lateral thruster controls forward with his left hand and ripped the starboard yaw stabilizers back with his right. It was a maneuver that would have torn a lesser ship in half. The Dreadnought wasn't built for dogfighting. It was built to sit still and look majestic. When the thrusters fired, the entire frame groaned. A sound like the planet itself was cracking open. Gravity went sideways. Jarek felt his stomach slam into his ribs. The inertial dampeners lagged by a microsecond, just enough for physics to remind him that he was a bag of meat inside a metal can spinning at impossible speeds. His vision grayed out at the edges, structural integrity at 90%, the warden shouted. The AI's voice modulated to cut through the roaring of the hull. Shear forces are critical. Not yet, Jarek wheezed through clenched teeth. On the tactical display, the 3 tugs were highlighted in red. They were powerful little ships, engines designed to pull dead weight in a straight line. They weren't designed to handle 100,000 tons of mass suddenly becoming a centrifuge. The lead tug tried to compensate. It fired its counter thrusters, trying to kill the spin. It was the logical move. It was the wrong move. Physics lesson, Jarek snarled, fighting the G-force that was trying to peel his face off. Torque equals force times radius. The Dreadnought was a kilometer-long lever. The tugs were the fulcrum, and the fulcrum just snapped. There was a screech of tearing metal that vibrated through the deck plates and into Jarek's bones. The magnetic clamps on the port side failed first. The sudden release unbalanced the spin, turning the control rotation into a violent tumble. The second tug was flung away like a child's toy, its tow cable snapping and whipping back against its own hull. The third tug, realizing the math had turned lethal, emergency detached and scattered into the dark. We are free, Alara gasped. She was gripping the edge of the console so hard her knuckles were white, blood draining from her face. Not yet, Jurek said. His hands were shaking on the controls, not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump that hit him like a physical blow. Warden, dump the reserve power into the sublight engines. Get us out of the gravity well. Any heading. Just go. Engine output at 110%. Warning, navigation is uncalibrated. Do it. The main drives ignited. It wasn't a smooth acceleration. It was a kick in the back. The stars on the viewport streaked into lines of white fire, and Station 9 vanished behind them, swallowed by the void. Jarek held the course for 10 minutes. 10 minutes of silence broken only by the cooling fans spinning down and the ragged sound of his own breathing. Finally, when the sensors showed nothing but empty space for a million clicks, he pulled back on the throttle. The ship drifted. Jarek unbuckled his harness. He tried to stand, but his legs didn't work. He slid down the side of the command throne and sat on the cold deck, leaning his head back against the metal. His chest heaved. He tasted copper. He'd bitten his tongue during the spin. Ilara unstrapped and slid down next to him. She looked at him, her dark curls wild, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and exhilaration. "You're insane," she said softly. "You used a kilometer-long archive ship as a mace." "It worked," Jarek croaked. He wiped a trickle of blood from his lip. "Did we break anything important?" "Just the laws of orbital mechanics," the warden chimed in. The hologram materialized in the center of the bridge, flickering slightly, and 3 minor stabilizing fins. "However, the archives are intact." Jarek closed his eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in his gut. He had won. He had the ship. He had the girl. He had the AI. But he didn't feel like a winner. "Show me the map again," Jarek said. "The black part." The galaxy map floated above them, beautiful and terrifying. The stagnation, the silence, was a massive creeping void on the edge of the display. It looked peaceful, uniform, perfect. "We have to go there," Hilaris said, her voice quiet. She wasn't asking. She was stating a fact. The other ships, the ones that didn't make it, or the ones that gave up, we have to find them. We have to wake them up before the silence takes them. Jarek looked at the void. He thought about the auction. He thought about the blue alien watching the game, perfectly content, perfectly distracted. He thought about the salvage yards, the rust, the cold nights eating ration bars that tasted like chalk. He had spent his whole life trying to get away from the chaos, trying to find a score big enough to buy him some peace, some stability. And now, looking at that map, he realized the joke. Peace was the enemy. Stability was the death sentence. "They won't want to be saved," Jarek said. The realization hit him harder than the G-forces had. The people in those sectors, the ones falling into the stagnation. They're happy, aren't they? No war, no hunger, no pain. "They're not living, Jarek," Alara said. "They're just existing." "I know," Jarek said. He forced himself to stand up. His knees cracked. He walked to the viewport and stared out at the infinite, uncaring stars. He wasn't a hero. Heroes were noble. Heroes fought for justice. He was a mechanic, a scavenger. He was the guy you called when the engine was knocking, and you didn't care how ugly the fix was, as long as it ran. The galaxy didn't need a savior. It needed a wrench in the gears. It needed someone to break the perfect machine before it stopped moving forever. "Warden," Jarek said, his voice flat, "plot a course for the edge of the silence." "That is a high-risk vector," the warden replied. "The probability of survival is less than 17%. Jarek looked at his reflection in the dark glass. He looked tired. He looked older than his 30 years. He looked like a man who had just realized that his retirement plan was a war that would never end. 17%, Jarek muttered. He turned back to the empty bridge, to the darkness waiting for them. That's better than zero. Let's go make a mess. That's the story. But Jarek didn't survive just because of luck. He survived because he understood the cold, hard math of the void. Let's break down the 3 tactical concepts hidden in this mission. Number 1. Physics structural resonance. Most people looked at that ship and saw grime. They saw rust. But Jarek looked past the surface. He analyzed the hull integrity and mass displacement. He knew that beneath the dirt, the bones of the ship were solid. The lesson, don't judge the machine by the paint job, always check the structural reality. Number 2, psychology, the normalcy bias. Why did everyone else at the auction ignore a Dreadnought? Because it was priced cheap. Their brains fell into the trap of normalcy bias, assuming that if the crowd is ignoring it, it must be junk. Jarek won because he questioned the crowd. The lesson, when everyone is looking left at the game, that's your signal to look right at the opportunity. And number 3, execution, the OODA loop. This is how a scavenger beats a supercomputer. The AI was stuck trying to calculate a perfect answer. Jarek used the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. He realized that a fast, imperfect decision beats a slow, perfect one every time. The lesson: in a survival situation, speed is your armor. Don't wait to be right. Just be first. This is The Witness, signing off. Stay sharp.